We're going to look at the peripheral nerves that you're required to know. And remember, all your peripheral nerves are mixed nerves, and that they have both afferent and efferent fibers. So remember, afferent fibers are carrying sensory information, while efferent fibers are carrying motor information. So first, though, we're going to go through a list of the nerves that I would like for you to know, and we're going to fill in which nerve plexus supplies fibers to each of the nerves. So remember, a nerve plexus is created by the ventral rami of some of your spinal nerves. So the phrenic nerve has fibers from the cervical plexus. And the cervical plexus, remember, is a network of fibers that is going to provide innervation to structures up in the head and the neck and the thoracic cavity. The median radial nerves, those are two nerves that have fibers from the brachial plexus. So the brachial plexus supplies innervation to structures in your arm. And I know brachial means upper arm, but it's going to provide innervation to your entire upper extremity, including your forearm and your hand. So brachial plexus for median and radial nerve. The genitofemoral, femoral, and obturator nerves all have fibers that originate from the lumbar plexus. So lumbar plexus is going to be supplying structures in, say, your lower extremity, and kind of in the genital areas. It depends on, again, the nerve. Pelvic area. And then the last two, sciatic and pudendal nerve, they have fibers from the sacral plexus. So these, again, are going to be providing innervation to lower extremities, genitalia, again, in pelvic cavity, again, depending on which nerve we're talking about. So we're going to look at first the phrenic nerve, and then we'll look at the median and radial nerve. Subsequent recordings will look at the three nerves that have fibers from the lumbar plexus, and then another recording we're going to look at the sciatic and pudendal nerve. So let's look at the phrenic nerve. So phrenic nerve is a major nerve that supplies innervation to your diaphragm. Your diaphragm is extremely important muscle in being able to inhale, breathing. And this is a mnemonic that I've always remembered is C3, 4, and 5, keep the diaphragm alive. Very rarely do I personally remember a lot of the spinal nerves that provide innervation to each of our peripheral nerves, but there's a couple that I remember, and this is one of them just because of that mnemonic that someone has taught to me. So this will carry sensory information from the thoracic cavity, but also it is the primary nerve that provides innervation to the diaphragm, for you need to be able to inhale. When the diaphragm contracts, it actually flattens out, increases the volume of your thoracic cavity so air can move into your lungs. The nerves of the brachial plexus that we will look at is we're going to be looking at the functioning of the radial and median nerves, but there are three other nerves that are supplied by the brachial plexus: the ulnar nerve, the axillary nerve, and the musculocutaneous nerve. But we're going to focus on the radial and median nerves. So first, let's look at median nerve. So it has, again, it's a mixed nerve. So it's going to have sensory functions. And so it does have cutaneous innervation to the hand. And you'll see the ulnar, median, and radial nerves do provide cutaneous innervation to the hand in different parts of the hand. So let's just focus on where you see the kind of the darker blue. So the median nerve is going to carry sensory information from the palmar surface of your thumb, index, middle, and half of your ring finger, and the dorsal surface of your middle and distal phalanges of your index, middle, and half of your ring finger. So like if I take my index finger and I set it down and something's hot, that nerve is going to be carrying the information to the central nervous system, which ultimately is going to tell me that thing was hot. It also, the median nerve does have a number of motor functions. So it's going to innervate a number of skeletal muscles in the forearm, which and hand, that will be responsible for certain motor actions or certain muscle actions. Periodically, I may say a name of a muscle that is innervated by it. At this point in time, you don't need to know them. Maybe later in the semester in lab, you might have to be able to identify some of the muscles, but I'm just going to kind of mention it because you may hear about them later in the semester. But it's definitely important that you know what these actions are. So first thing we're going to look at is the functions of the median nerve. One of the things it does is it is important for flexion of the wrist. So flexion is a term that kind of refers to bending, or technically in anatomy referred to as decreasing the angle between two body parts. So this is going to be involved in flexion of the wrist because it innervates some muscles in the forearm that are wrist flexors. So two of the wrist flexors that are innervated by this particular nerve is something called I'll just write them down for you, the palmaris longus and the flexor carpi radialis. These are two of the muscles that I have students identify in lab. There's another wrist flexor called the flexor carpi ulnaris. However, that's actually innervated by the ulnar nerve. It's also important in what we call pronation of our hand or the forearm. The pronation of the hand is where you rotate the hand or the forearm so that the surface of the palm faces down or toward the back. So remember, in anatomical position, your arms are in a supinated position. But here, pronate is you're taking those palms and moving them down or towards the back. So this does innervate something called the pronator teres muscle. That's responsible for that. Another thing it's involved in is it has two names. We call it radial deviation, or it's also going to have a different name to it. It's referred to as abduction, so wrist abduction, where you're bending the wrist away from the midline of the body. They call it radial deviation because it's moving towards this bone here, which is the radius. The muscle that's responsible for that is the flexor carpi radialis. Okay, so that's wrist abduction. All right, another one, actions that it's involved in is a lot of movements of the fingers and the thumbs. So start with thumb. So it's flexion of the thumb. Okay, so these are all going to be thumb. Flexion of the thumb. So here you're decreasing the angle between the thumb and the palm. So you see flexion of the thumb in the picture, the first picture. Opposition involves a lot of different movements, but when we're talking opposition of the thumb, this is the ability to move the thumb to touch the other finger. So it doesn't have to just be the pinky finger. So if this is touching that finger, that finger, that finger. So that is opposition. Returning it, they call it reposition. But it's involved in opposition of the thumb. It's another one. It's also involved in flexion of your index, and I couldn't find a picture that shows just those, so it's showing you flexion of the fingers. But again, flexion of the fingers is you're bending or decreasing the angle there. So you're kind of moving those fingers closer to your palm for flexion of the fingers. And it's flexion of the index and your middle fingers only. So with that in mind, I want you to think about is if I asked you to make a fist, okay, try to make a fist. If you had damage to the median nerve, it would impair your ability to flex your thumb, your index, and your middle fingers. Therefore, you would see something like this. They refer to this as the benediction sign. If you're Catholic, you know what the benediction sign, so you think about the Pope blessing people that kind of have that the way their hand is. But this is showing you the inability to be able to flex that thumb, middle, and index finger. So this is what would happen if someone had damage to their median nerve. Okay, next one we're going to look at is the radial nerve. So we're going to focus on the pink first for the sensory. So it has cutaneous innervation to your fingers and in your hand, and it carries sensory information from the skin on the dorsal surface of the lateral side surface of your palm, the dorsal surface of your thumb, dorsal surface of the index, middle, half your ring finger, and it does go up including your proximal phalanges, so you kind of see here, you can see all of that there. So you kind of see in pink where the innervation by the radial nerve is from. The does also have motor functions, so we're going to look at some of the motor functions. So it's involved in extension of the elbow, so I'll write elbow extension. So here you're seeing someone doing what we refer as a elbow extension, or they're pretty much working their triceps brachii muscle, because the muscle responsible for that is the triceps brachii. It's in the back part of your upper arm, and the radial nerve innervates that muscle. So that's extension of the elbow. It also is going to be innervating pretty much a lot of extensors. As a little rule of thumb, just so you know, the muscles in the anterior aspect of your arm are flexors. Posterior arm are extensors. So median, that is going to affect a lot of muscles that are found in the anterior arm. The radial will be innervating structures or muscles on the posterior arm. So it is involved in wrist extension, so it innervates a couple muscles called the extensor carpi radialis and extensor carpi ulnaris. And the only reason why I'm writing some of these are muscles that I usually have students identify, except the pronator teres. That's not one of them I have students identify. I don't do muscles for the hands, though. That's why I'm not going to write any of those down. It also is involved in extension of the thumb. So you kind of see it's going back. Before you saw the flexion, it was this way. Extension, we're going back. It is involved in extension of the fingers. So now you're taking those fingers and returning back to where they were before. So we're increasing the angle between the bones for that. So that's extension of the fingers. Now, if the radial nerve is damaged, this is something that you may see, is if I had you just put your arm out and say, hold your wrist straight, parallel to the floor. You're actually having to contract some muscles to keep that wrist flat. However, if the radial nerve is damaged, you're not going to be able to extend the wrist. And what will happen is you'll see wrist drop. So the wrist should be able to, if I asked you to do it, go out here. But if you've got damage to the radial nerve, those muscles will not be able to extend the wrist, and you would have what we call wrist drop. So we're going to stop here. And the next recording, we're going to look at the nerves that have innervation from the lumbar plexus.